pandemic has impacted every aspect of our society. The Indian economy is no different. It is expected to go through traumatic phase till 2025. The economic tension has increased in the country since March, with businesses struggling to make ends meet. But many disagree. They say that the Indian economy is poised for a quick recovery. But if you see the numbers, you realize that the impact on the Indian economy has been the greatest. India's growth forecast over the next 5 years from 6.5% to 4.5% is worrying. According to Oxford Economics, the balance sheet stress will worsen if the pandemic wanes. COVID-19 has sent the global economy into a recession much greater than the 1930s Great Depression. With an output of 12% below pre-virus levels through the middle of the decade, the country might have to rethink its targets. India's economy is worth $2.9 trillion. Prime Minister Modi's commitment of making India a $5 trillion economy by 2025 needs to be recalibrated. Last week, a paper published by RBI predicted that Asia's third largest economy has entered a historic technical recession. Worldwide, the lockdown has paralyzed activities. According to IMF, India's GDP will shrink 10.3% by March 2021. A report by the United Nations reveals that the Indian economy is forecasted to contract by 5.9% in 2020. If we see the other side of the coin, there are still certain things in our hands. Demographics of the country are favorable. India is well placed to benefit from globalization and outsourcing. Investment has increased amidst the pandemic. But there are targets which need to be recalibrated. Where will the Indian economy go from here? These difficult questions run alongside deep concerns. New Delhi Bureau, Democracy News Live.
The global economy is in recession. We know where we stand today. A lot of the countries continue to facing fresh lockdowns. Indian economy is no different. But there is a concern that the Indian economy may not recover as quickly and may stay down for a while. But there are lots of bright spots to it. For example, rural India, agrarian growth. And I think just to get a sense of where India will stand in the next few years, how India will recover, and how much India is impacted, we're bringing on three economists today on the show. Bernali Bhandari, she's a senior fellow at the NCAER. Arpita Mukherjee, she's a professor at the ICRIAR, and Jayjeet Bhattacharya, he's a professor at IIT Delhi. He's a former partner of KPMG. Welcome to the show. Let me start the show with Bernali. Bernali, could you give me a little sense? We hear all these numbers constantly, that India's economy, is down 12%. The next 2021 is going to be seeing 25% reduction in output. What do these numbers really mean? Give us a little sense of how do you assess this forecast and where is the Indian economy going in the next little while?
So we measure the Indian economy or any economy by a measure called gross domestic product, which is essentially the value of all final goods and services that is produced in the country. So what happened is in the first quarter, that is when we say first quarter, we are talking about the fiscal year, that is April to June period. So April to June, that's the first quarter of a fiscal year, GDP contracted by 23.9, which is 24% on a year-on-year basis. That means compared to the previous period, same period of the previous year. So compared to 1920, April to June period 2021, we contracted by 24%. Now that's a significant contraction. I think where we need to put ourselves in perspective is that April to June, especially April and May, we were completely locked down. April specifically, and as the economy opened slowly between May and then June, there were economies opening. We find that, of course, economy is resurging back, and almost all the leading indicators, they are showing that of other frequency, their monthly indicators are showing that we have recovered very sharply. We see a V-shaped recovery. Compared to April, we see a V-shaped recovery in June. But from June onwards, the contraction growth rates taper off. They're positive, but they're shallower than what they were in the April to June period. So what the first quarter is telling us that we contracted by 24%. The second quarter, that is the July to September period, we forecast that contraction will be, we will still contract. That's the bad news. The good news is that the contraction will be moderated, and the GDP numbers that are coming out at the end of this week will tell us how far we have contracted. And I think the challenge here is to forecast what's going to be in the second half of the financial year. The second half of the financial year, the indications are if there's a second wave of the pandemic, that may affect our economic activity, whether directly through a lockdown or through indirect local containment measures. Also, the external economy movement, how the external economy is faring with the lockdown in US and Germany, that will affect us because that will affect our external demand through exports and imports. So these are both domestically and externally, these are challenging times. And as you rightly said, agriculture is the only bright spot in the country which has seen positive growth of 3%. But however, there have been losses, like especially in vegetables, onions and tomatoes, potatoes, which actually got impacted, and therefore which has driven up inflation. So we are in very, very challenging times where we are seeing slowing growth, contraction, quarter and series of contractions for at least 2 quarters, and then this is combined with very high inflation, which is driven by food inflation.
Sure.
But even our core inflation remains elevated. So that is the challenge for the Indian economy.
Great.
As we go forward.
Thank you, Bernali. Thank you for setting the stage. Arpita, taking away from Bernali's statement there, we're in very challenging times. How challenging are these challenging times? Can you set the stage a bit for us?
Hi Rohit. The issue is that, see, there are multiple factors that are operating, because pandemic is not a usual situation. So when you have a pandemic, you have you have your own economy not doing well, and the global economy not helping you out by doing well. So here what is happening is, while we have contracted, we had a lockdown, there were also cancellation of orders in many areas like apparel from the key markets like US and European Union brands were cancelling their order. So it is a mix between the domestic economy and a global economy that we are undergoing a tremendous worrisome situation. Now if the demand picks up, now among all of this, then we also have supply chain disruptions, and to manufacture you need a smooth supply chain. You go through and if you have a supply chain disruption where the country from which you are importing or a country that you are exporting to is also going under a lockdown, you will be affected. So both in terms of your own economy and in terms of the global supply chains, we have been affected. Employment and SMEs, I think, are the two key areas which need focus attention, because unless we are able to stop the SMEs shrinking down, they are not able to survive. And one of the reasons that they are not able to survive was that Indian SMEs have not been into the financial inclusion. They have not been into the organized sector. So they don't have the organized sector benefits. They don't have the direct online access to banks. We took a long time to do any kind of benefits to SMEs through direct transfers. So, there are certain areas like focused attention to digital inclusion of SMEs, certain categories of vulnerable groups of who are being unemployed, like youth. These will be some of the focus areas of the government. Not to mention that our geopolitical tensions with China, which is actually one of our key trading partners, have, did not help us. There are two things. One is that from a economic security perspective, this is a concern. Secondly, from business perspective, this is a concern, because they have not been able to really change their supply chain. More recently, when all the other countries, 15 countries went ahead and signed an RCEP, that puts us really at a disadvantage vis-a-vis, vis-a-vis these 15 countries for which we compete in developed country markets in many sectors. Like, look at a country like Vietnam, which has RCEP and which has a U agreement and a US agreement, and us. But our business, even before they decide a pricing strategy, are at a disadvantage. So the market globally, as we talk to a lot of buyers, the market globally is becoming price sensitive. Even in developed countries, we have a problem there. Yet, as a low cost market, we have a problem there because the sensitiveness is so high now. Secondly, the market is becoming standard sensitive in food, non-food. So now there is a group of people who is very high, willing to pay a very high price for, say, organic food or quality produce. And if we produce PPE kits, that's not important. We have to meet the standards, and that is something that we are struggling. Third, which we discuss a lot, is the supply chain. Our own supply chain, logistics cost, input cost like power, they continue to be very high,
Arpita,
and that
you've given Ar- Arpita, the way you've given out the arguments, I think you've covered a lot of ground here. I want to lay that out a bit. First of all, Arpita kind of laid out the idea of the small and medium enterprises and employment. I think it's a very, very big area. A large part of the Indian economy is SME. They weren't part of the structure. They continue to struggle. A lot of them continue to staying shut even today, and they do not have any help. They continue facing the lockdown, and it's a very, very challenging area for them. Secondly, supply chain. A lot of the manufacturing is based on a very international supply chain. If you look at the high end, whether we look at medication, whether we look at electronics, these are a full on system where a specific product comes from one country or another place, then that country, that product is reproduced into something else. When, let's say, medicines, there are salts which come from different places, and you put those salts together and you create the medication. So that's been impacted. The third thing, which obviously Arpita brought up, was the tension with China. The tension with China certainly didn't play, good for anybody. It created a large global challenge. It created a big challenge for India because a lot of the products that were coming from China were blocked at the border by the customs. They weren't clearing it. So obviously it impacted the chain here. Then we get down to, not being part of the RCEP, which means larger global agreements. And finally, what she talked about was quality produce. Producing quality is always a challenge area. And I think those are steps that need to be taken if we need to mature as a market, if India needs to mature as a market. And I think these are all challenges. We need to be addressing them one after the other and, with focus. If you do not address all of these areas with focus, don't think we'll be able to achieve what we set out to achieve. Let me bring in Jayjeet here. Jayjeet is very, very positive around how the economy will, continue going back to where it was, to its old levels. But obviously, you have a few riders there. Jayjeet, give us a little sense of where do you think this recovery will be faster than what others envisage it will be?
So let me put the correct perspective. That will it be faster than any other country? That's really an open question. But let's just look at the advantages that India has and why it's not a very pessimistic situation. One of the key advantages that India continues to bring to the table is the demographic dividend. We still have a bunch of kids, maturing, turning 18, turning 24, getting into the job market. They will buy stuff, and that will propel the economy. And that truth hasn't yet changed. That's an advantage we'll have for another 10 years. And if we are not able to grow post that, then we are in deep trouble because we will not even reach a medium income country such as China has. And if we don't reach a medium income country, then we are in trouble. But I don't believe that in 2020 we should say we are in trouble as of now. The second reason why we would be growing is, in fact, something that Professor Mukherjee alluded to, which is the disruption that's happening because of the geopolitics. The fact that China has started playing against the rules of engagement in terms of the global engagement that is out there, supply chains are now pushing out of China. And clearly, India is turning out to be a very favorite destination. Clearly, there are competitors such as Vietnam and Cambodia and Bangladesh and so on and so forth, but nobody but India can provide the kind of scale that is needed in order to ramp up and be able to be a viable alternative to China. China's greatest advantage was able to provide manufacturing at scale, and that's something that India can do. We have seen that in a very short period of time, India has been able to scale up and be one of the largest providers of PPE. We have, in fact, come from nowhere to become the second largest producer of mobile phones in the world, and so on and so forth. So, we have shown that we can and are doing a great amount of scalability and are able to get a large amount of manufacturing, greenfield manufacturing being set up in India. In terms of stretched balance sheet that was mentioned in the beginning of this discussion, we have had stretched balance sheets since the last decade. We have had stretched balance sheets since the end of the 2010s, where because of PPP, many of the corporations started having stretched balance sheet. And along with it, the banks also started to have stretched balance sheet, and they were at alarming levels in 2012, 2013. But in the last 10 years, we have continued to grow in spite of these situations. And I believe that, yes, because of COVID, balance sheets have come under stress. But that does not really stop us from growing because of the very basic nature of the market. We will stop growing if we leave the market to other companies to exploit. If you look at, for example, the car market, we have grown at 27.7% month on month between September and October. So clearly, there is a large amount of pent-up demand. And it's not just pent-up demand, it's also real demand growth coming up post that. If you look at historic dips that have happened, be it the Asian financial crisis of 1996, the global financial crisis of 2008, right after those financial crises, there has been very significant amount of growth, which continued to be sustained post the year after which the global dip happened or the local dip happened. And therefore, what we believe in summation is that India is actually in a good position to continue to grow just because of the set of factors we are in, which includes demographics, which includes local demands, which also includes a disruption in the global supply chain because of geopolitics, which is in a way favorable to what India brings to the table.
Jayjeet, there are two things which I want to kind of, if I want to, open the debate on a bit more, and I'll bring in Barnali here. One of the things you talked about is, the advantage India has because of a younger population. And the younger population is of great advantage only when they're skilled. If they're unskilled and the skilling doesn't happen, and we've been hearing about skilling for the last 10 years, every prime minister, government that's come, it's talked about this amazing skilling network they're setting up and all these institutes they're setting up. But I've yet to meet anybody coming out of these skilling institutes, and actually the advantage we had because of the dividend of this young population to be seen. I haven't seen it impact on the ground. I'm not seeing electricians and plumbers and all of that. The other thing which you talked about is production is certainly getting ramped up, and let's look at mobile phones, for example. But what I'm beginning to, I'm going out in the field and I'm meeting a lot of people on the villages and different places. I'm seeing the rich are getting richer and the poor are becoming poorer. This is based on the idea when you actually begin hiring people outside, they're available for much lesser price than they were available a year ago. So those are my two questions which I'm grappling with as we talk of those two big issues. I think they're very important issues and we must continue. Barnali, do you want to weigh in on this idea? Do you see skilling happening and do you see it impacting the bottom line of the country?
Okay, I may sound like a dismal scientist here, but just setting the ground, just by the numbers, just one line for the numbers. So the NCR, where we forecast GDP in September, and we forecast that GDP will renew first quarter, it contract by 23.9. In second quarter, we forecast it contract by 12.7. Then third was 8.6, and the fourth quarter was 6.2. Totally, GDP was supposed to forecast by 12.6%. To 10% next or 12%. I'm just setting the numbers for you. That means that in 1920, our GDP was 145.7 rupees crore, trillion, 145.7 or 146 rupees trillion. In 2021, if we assume some 13% fall, contraction, our GDP will fall by 126%. Now it depends on where we are going to be in next 1 year. Okay, we might, if we grow by 14% or double-digit increase in 21-22, we might go back to the long-term GDP by in 1 year. If we grow by say 7%, or half of that, then it takes us 2 years to go back to what we were in 1920. So I just want to set it for. From then on, just to tell you that for the last 3 years, our average growth rate was 5.8%. So if we continue to grow at 5.8% after 2021 or 21-22 or 22-23, whenever we get back to 1920, if we continue going back at 5.8%, we will, it will take us more than 20 years or never to get back to what we were, to the counterfactual. That is, if we had grown without the COVID. And if we grow, say, at 7% after 22-23, then it will take us till 2037, 38 to reach back to what we would have been without the COVID. Now, why am I spouting these numbers to you? What I'm trying to emphasize is it will take us 20 years to get back to what we would have been without the COVID. Now, just remember that we just said skilling, the demographic dividend is the demographic the working age population is going to peak between 2020 to 2040. This is as per NCR skills report and of course UN projections. And we have actually shown that that means this period of the demographic when our working age population is going to peak is going to coincide with some of the, we are going to go, assuming we still continue to growing at 5.8 or 7%, this is going to be, we are exactly not matching the growth, the slower growth rate is exactly not matching with when our working age population is growing. So there is a mismatch between growth and skills. So the most important thing, as you have pointed out, Rohit, is that our skilling system is our education and skilling system together. If you look at it together, so I don't want to just look at vocational skilling and plumbers and electricians. The fact of the matter is our college students don't get jobs. So if you look at the system holistically, this is NCR skills report, and we've identified what kind of skills. I'm not going to get into that. The point is, if you the skilling system is very weak in India, education system. The recent ASER report shows that everybody did not have the emphasis on the digital divide. So we are on one hand, we are not going to have enough growth. Even if we have 7% growth, we still don't catch up. And we are not, our skilling system is still quite weak. Our education system is weak. The new education policy is not going to change things overnight. It will take time to change things on ground. So together, I don't think so the demographic dividend per se is going to come and help us. And secondly, at a very minor point, but it's important, that if you look at even our high growth period between 2004-5 to 11-12, there's enough evidence which shows that that was a period of high growth, but jobless growth. So imagine if that time we had high growth, but we were not creating enough jobs, and now we are not even growing. So where will the jobs come from? Our supply systems are still weak. Our demand is not growing for jobs and therefore skills, because skills is an indirect demand. I think the long run challenge was always very hard, and it has just got worse. And I'm sorry to sound like a dismal scientist here.
No. I think it's important because if we do not raise the red flags, then there won't be enough people who are going to continue working on it. And that's a very important bit of it. Sometimes people say, you're being extremely negative. It's like our jobs to be, to be questioning what's happening on the ground. If we don't question what's happening on the ground, then people won't work hard enough on it. Arpita, do you want to weigh in a bit in terms of, I know we've heard the good side, we've heard the bad side, and the challenges around it. What if you were, the advising economist, telling us about what we need to touch and what we need to do ASAP to be able to bring back the economy up on its feet? Is there a direction that it needs to take? Is there a scientific way of looking at it?
Yes, see, basically, I will be midway between, the two speakers, and yes, we do have some strengths, and one of the strength I think we missed it is the technology strength. We are the IT base, and somehow in the verge of being, so worried about the foreign e-commerce companies, we forgot that our engineers are globally there who serves all these companies and are developing programs. So if they do these wonders at home, how good we can be in tech. So therefore, there has to be a focused attention to the growth of tech at this stage, and that attention requires clarity on certain things like policy or data sharing with the trust. I'm also very worried when data is moving across border security and other reasons, but that doesn't prohibit us from becoming the outsourcing hub and sharing. Also, we are sharing healthcare like sensitive data. So data and technology is going to be the drivers, and we need to focus on that. Regarding demand, we have already, we have mapped certain areas where demand is growing. There has been a demand for PPE kit, medicines, electronic goods, because you are now needing it for your children education, etc. at home. Or of course cars also, because of social distancing. But it doesn't mean all types of demand are growing, and one of the core ways of bringing a large country with a young population all this strength out is to boost demand. I think there is a need to do now demand boosting policies. In India, we do better when we actually have policies which are good, like low corporate tax, which we already tried to implement, and demand boosting policies, rather than first taxing high and then putting in hundreds of subsidies to which can be negated in the WTO and other areas. So that is one area which need focus. Government is aware of skilling, they need focus, but there is a difference between awareness about skilling and what type of skilling. I think that the industry needs to use this opportunity to become more technology oriented, and therefore the skilling has to be guided towards the fourth industrial revolution type of skilling, which we lack. So therefore there has to be certain focus skilling, linking it to course curriculums in engineering institutes. You are now going to use more technology, and you should be willing to adopt it at a very at a college curriculum level. At even in hospitals, government hospitals should be able to do EMR. So these will be some of the areas where you need to focus on. Startups and entrepreneurship will be one of the areas which needs a lot of promotion by the government, which India somehow has a lot of startups, but the kind of support they get is less. They are very much dependent on VC funding, and if we have stopped funding from certain countries, that is an area that we need to look into alternative support for the startups and SMEs. Inclusion, this is the something that the government need to focus on, like digital financial inclusion for SMEs, women, youth. So the inclusive indices along with growth indices would require a lot of attention. Last but not the least, ever since the days of Keynes, it is always that when your economy is not doing well, please invest in your infrastructure and other areas, and that kind of creates employment, uplift economies. And India, there is ample scope for doing such investment. My worry is not on the scopes and the scales and the understanding. My worry is the need of the finance to meet all of this, balancing it out with the healthcare needs. But there is a huge financial need today, and how do you actually manage your budget to meet all your requirements is something that it is not all about a policy announcement, but how do you really manage to make it happen.
Thank you, Arpita. Really, again, you've left us with multiple very important points. I'm going to flush them out a bit. You talked about technology as one of the key areas where India certainly can benefit from. Absolutely, India can benefit from technology. We're great engineers. We, are capable engineers. But when I see the implementation on the ground, again, that's where the challenge area comes in. Half of the government's websites where, people use don't work. I was using this 2 weeks ago. I was using the transport department's website. It took payments, didn't give out anything out. You travel around this country. There is technology, there is great internet available in Delhi, Bombay, maybe a few more cities. You go to a place like Goa, internet's awful. You go to the Northeast, internet is awful. You go to Kashmir, internet is awful. So there are certainly large parts of even rural India which are completely disconnected. If you do not create an equitable distribution network with availability of that technology, and then making sure that you begin training people ground up rather than and only in these centers, so that people can actually leverage that technology. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is. They always stay in these small pockets. A large part of the population gets left out, and it doesn't really grow as fast. Again, skilling, aligning the skilling with what's required on the ground is all about this. You may get certain staffing only in certain places. If you begin trying to even do it in other places, it's not going to work. Jajit, I know we've heard the whole spectrum. We've kind of understood where our challenges lie as India, and what are the growth areas. Now, out of all of this, do you see certain specific things that we need to do first to begin seeing the change, to begin seeing the uptick in the economy? I know Arpita talked about creating the demand. How is the demand going to get created when people don't have the money in their pockets? And that's where a lot of the challenges, for the economy come from that, I guess.
So Rohit, let me just add to that point that people don't have money in their pockets, neither does the government have money in their pockets. We are a resource constrained economy. And we have been continually being resource constrained. If you look at 8, 9 years back, we were in quite a pathetic situation. Obviously, 1991 we cannot forget as in the kind of situation we were in. Same in 1957, and so on and so forth. So there have been many near-death experiences that we have faced as a country. So we continue to be extremely resource challenged. Within that, I'll carry off from where Professor Mukherjee left, which is clearly infrastructure spending is one of the most important areas to look at. And fortunately, that continues to happen. It can happen only at a certain pace, and can happen within the institutional structures that India have. We can change some of those structures, which we have seen happening, and which has helped in contributing to the rollout of infrastructure happening at a picked up scale. The good part is that that's happening not just for central government infrastructure, but also state government infrastructures. We have seen, for example, the Lucknow to Agra highway coming up in a record period of 18 months, from nothing being there to the entire land acquisition and development happening within that period of 18 to 24 months, completely unheard of, and absolutely state-of-the-art infrastructure being rolled out. Similarly, there is infrastructure being rolled out in terms of shipping, coastal shipping, riverine transportation, airports, helipads, and so on and so forth. So we do see that infrastructure coming up. In fact, if you look at the growth that happened because of the highways being rolled out in the beginning of 2000, and in the subsequent decade, we saw the impact of those infrastructure being rolled out, which led to a large amount of growth happening, albeit jobless growth. The other dimension to it is what you rightly talked about was skills, because growth can happen only when we have got individuals who are able to contribute to the economy beyond their muscle power. If their contribution is limited to the muscle power, then it's as bad as a cattle that we have in the country. And I've said that for over a decade now, that if we are not able to train our manpower, then the contribution is going to be limited to only the muscle that they can bring to the table. Now, unfortunately, when we say things like the skill has to be aligned to the fourth industrial revolution, essentially what we are saying is that they need to be continuously reskilled, which also means that they need to be reskillable. And in fact, to begin with, they should be skillable. Why am I pointing to these words? Is because without good, solid primary education, none of this is possible. Unfortunately, for generations, we have had no good primary education. We have got students coming out of primary school who cannot even read, they cannot write, they cannot understand the written word. And without these basic skills, a person cannot be skillable in the 21st century. And therefore, that's the end of having skills in the fourth industrial revolution. All that they can be used as is a marketplace where things will be sold to them. They will not be able to contribute in a disproportionate manner back to that market. having said these factors, on a larger, from a political perspective and from a governmental perspective, and by political I mean geopolitical perspective, what the government also needs to do is create space for people to able to set up industries, set up MSMEs, set up startups. And I think another thing that came up in the discussion was that we are an IT superpower and we have all the technology. Um, I'm saying this with great responsibility, and you know my background is technology. I'm a PhD in computer science. Technology is not about smart people. Technology is about access to capital. Technology is about institutional arrangements that lead to that technology getting created. And a very good example is exactly what you gave, Rohit, that you've got very smart people in this country, but why aren't the government systems any technologically advanced? Why are they not technologically advanced? Because it's nothing to do with smart people. It is access to capital, it's access to institutional structures, and it's access to the marketplace. We have let go of our marketplace from very early on. If you look at China, they did not let go of the marketplace. They did not let go of their digital marketplace. If tomorrow Google stops operating in China, there is no impact at all. If Google stops operating in India, there'll be millions of jobs that will be lost. And we just cannot afford to have Google stop operating in India. And that is where the whole concept of technological sovereignty starts coming in. We are subservient to a company, and that needs to change. Now, to bring in that change, there is enormous amount of capital that is needed. We have seen that large homegrown startups have now become American or they become Chinese in terms of their ownership, and that will continue to happen because the nature of the startups is that when you disrupt, you will disrupt for the entire market, and to do it for the entire market, you need enormous amount of capital to come in at the right time, which we don't have. We don't even have capital to roll out our roads. We don't have capital to roll out our railroads. We don't have capital to build the infrastructure that is needed. How can we take capital away from the poor, from the hospitals, from the schools, and pump them into startups which are by the very nature extremely risky? So it's a complex situation. There are no easy answers. It's easy to of course say that we must pump in money here and pump in money there. The fact of the matter is there is no money left. And should we now go back and start borrowing more, which has its own implication because then we are basically borrowing from future. What does borrowing essentially mean? That your and my children will then start paying up at some time in future, just like we are paying up for whatever borrowing that happened in the past. Is that the right way to do? Sometimes it is. There's nothing wrong in borrowing per se, as long as the borrowing is done in a targeted manner and is not frittered away in goodies being given away as part of election sobs. So as long as it leads to productive assets being built up, that's great. If there is a road being built between two productive cities, that's acceptable. But if there is a railway station being built between two different places where there are no people except voters and no economic activity, that is not acceptable. And therefore, that's where the answer lies to the queries that we have been discussing, that there is a way out. The answers are typically the same. It is execution that matters.
Very, very important points. What we require is brain and not brawn, I will say. I won't use the word cattle. You never know what happens. And I think a very essential part of it is planning. What happens and how do we spend? Where do we invest? What's going to bring us return short term? What's going to bring us return long terms? I think these are all policy issues. These are all implementation issues on the ground. These are all operational issues on the ground. This cannot happen through, political canvassing. It happens through good, solid planning. It happens through a good system. And I think that's something that India needs to concentrate on if it needs to get its economy back on its 2 feet. Arpita, Varnali, Jajit, I thank you very much for a very, very enlightening conversation here. I really appreciate that you took out time for your really busy schedules and you've pointed India in the direction it needs to take. Thank you very much. Good night and good luck.